I'm Megan Hamilton, and this is the Embracing Enchantment podcast. We are so lucky today to have this magical person as today's guest. I came to know her work through an Instagram post and immediately knew I wanted to learn from her. Every time we connect, the synchronicities, or breadcrumbs, as she calls them, are frankly out of this world. Her book, What We've Forgotten, is a spell, a portal, a guidebook, a roadmap, and everything in between. And I haven't even touched on her award-winning work as a producer. She's a hereditary witch, a healer, and she belts Soundgarden songs like nobody else. I am thrilled that you're here, and welcome to you, Amy Miranda.
Thank you.
I had to get the Soundgarden reference in right off the bat.
Yeah.
Actually, when Amy and I were doing mic checks, I had her do a Chris Cornell counting. Okay. So one of the first things I do on this podcast is pull a tarot card to set a tone. And so I'm going to do that. And I think that one of the things that drew me to you pretty much instantly was that I knew like right away that you walk the talk.
Thank you.
And while I'm shuffling, I wonder if you can talk about what you mean when you say that you're a hereditary witch.
Yes, absolutely. And it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I love being with you.
Being a hereditary witch means that I come from witches. So my mom's a witch, my grandmother was a witch, my great-grandmother was a witch, probably further back people were witches. And then on my paternal side, my grandmother's maiden name is Pagan.
No.
Yeah. She's from Puerto Rico.
Really?
Yeah.
So your mom's a witch, your grandmother was a witch. What do you mean when
How
you say
did it
that?
manifest?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was funny because as a kid, I grew up, my great-great-grandfather was a circuit preacher. I grew up Catholic. So the idea of calling ourselves witches was not super popular. That was what I called us. So after family dinners, I noticed that there would be these little get-togethers that not everyone was included in. So some people would leave, and then there would be left at the table my mom, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and me. And of course, they would talk about experiences. They would talk about fairies. They would talk about clairvoyant visions and things like that they had had. And of course, as a kid, I was like, you guys are witches. Like, this is witchcraft. And they were like, no, that's not what we call it. We have gifts. So as I got older, eventually, the cat was let out of the bag, and now we all, we use that word, but it wasn't safe, right? It wasn't safe. That side of the family is Scottish. We descend from Clan Campbell and the Isle of Skye. So there's a lot of magic, over there. So, I grew up with, a lot of discussion about what was going on in non-ordinary reality, as I call it, because we've got sort of this reality that we all live in and that we are experiencing, which is hectic right now. And then we have non-ordinary reality, which is sort of known as spirit world or, the energetic realm. So there was a lot of stories when I was a kid that were about things that were going on in ordinary reality, but that were non-ordinary type of things. So my grandmother could smell. She would have smells. So there would be smells around the house that would represent certain things. And then just lots of stories of things that were non-ordinary that they would talk about or that they would remember. And of course, as I started to get older and had my own experiences, it was easier to take them to them than to, go to a family doctor. And as a young clairvoyant, when I was having visions or, voices, because I'm clairaudient as well, my mom took me to a psychic. That's how witches operate, to sort of see, what's going on with their young witches. So yeah, by the time I was, I think 17 or 18, I had already, kind of had my skills checked. So, yeah,
I love that. Yeah.
It was magical. There was always like a place for spirit in my house because we grew up, with, more organized religion, but there was always this other place for spirit that was the private sacred space that we would create to talk about things that were going on in spirit. So I always knew that there were things that would be safe to discuss in public, and then there were things that weren't. And of course now I just throw all those windows out the window, and those rules out the window, and I talk about everything. So
yeah. Well, and like I said, that was one of the things that, like, instantly, as soon as I think it was probably a post about your book, and as soon as I clicked over, I was like, whoops.
Oh,
okay.
How many fell out?
Like a gazillion.
I laugh, everyone, because
happens.
the rule is if they fall out, you're usually supposed to look at them all, but I feel like this is just a joke.
No, we're going to do it. Here we go. I'm getting up from the chair. Fuck, they're all falling everywhere. We have Ace of Pentacles, Page of Wands, Three of Pentacles, and Two of Pentacles reversed. Right,
Pentacles are all, isn't that Earth? I'm not as good at tarot as I am about other things. It's not my magic.
You know what's interesting? I was just thinking about this the other day. The way I learned guitar was I had to translate piano into guitar. And I'm realizing that the more I'm getting comfortable talking about astrology, I'm translating tarot through astrology, and it's, the 4 directions and the sign. Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Okay, so here we go. This is bananas. I did not anticipate this happening, but I also, one of the other things I noticed that is when you and I get together, and I'm going to ask you about your mediumship in a little bit, but I feel like you've told me before that there's like a lot of stuff happening around me in general. Like there's a lot of people that want to come through, and you're not the first person to tell me that. So it doesn't surprise me that I have 80,000 tarot cards that want to come up. All right. So we have Page of Wands, fresh energy, new beginnings, feeling into yourself, expressing yourself on the outside as you feel on the inside, and a new cycle. Energy, fire, Ace of Pentacles. What a lovely card to get. A new journey, right? Going through the moon gate. That's a portal. Your book is a portal. Support from the other side, a leg up, being well resourced, and help with that. Working together. That's another theme that's coming up for you and me today. Going to my questions. Elevating, something we do better together than alone. Non-traditional roles of power. So the Mason is elevated here, right? As opposed to the architect and the monk, who we would normally think of as like higher in terms of hierarchy. Working together to create something bigger than us, and changing power structures and dynamics. And Two of Pentacles reversed. Shit is out of balance. Things are out of whack. We have been trying to juggle it all. We have been trying so hard to keep it all together. And right now it just isn't. And that was one of the things I was thinking about actually before we got on today, because lately I'm just like, a lot of my energy is spent just trying to calm down. And that's, partly what's going on in my own little universe, but also globally. And I think that we've all been trying so hard to just keep it together with everything that's been happening. And it's falling apart because we were never meant to do this. This was never going to be a structure that we could carry and still be, I don't know, good people.
Well, it's a foundation that's not built on anything that is in alignment with universal law, right? So when we build a foundation that's rooted in things that, aren't in alignment with energy or spirit or the laws of nature, which, I like Nerd Town, I like science. And when we do that, eventually it's like, when will the fire be, right? So we're in the midst of that right now. And just a reminder for everyone that fire is the most transformative element. So a lot of us are afraid of it. when we think of trial by fire or fire, people get nervous. Whenever I have cards come up in readings where there's fire, people are like, ooh. But it's a very purifying element. I mean, the alchemists used it to create gold, right? It's used to create glass. It's a transformer, much like Optimus Prime. So this idea of, you know, I always call myself Optimist Prime, but this idea of, you know, recalibrating is something that we're all, and I think it's just a matter of recognizing it, right, and naming it. I do that a lot with my work where, you know, when I'm working with people, it's like we have to name things. So whether we're naming a challenging time, a healing crisis, sometimes that helps to take the weight off, right? And I think that, you know, humanity is having a healing crisis right now.
Yeah, agree. And yeah, I think even just naming it so that you contextualize yourself within it, right? It's not just you, like almost, I don't actually know anybody who's having an easy go of things right now. And that's not even, I mean, you can be aware of what's happening. You can have all the tools available to you, and you are still a human being experiencing you know, a huge pressure or series of pressures. And all you can do really is use your tools, keep going one foot forward, and doing your best to, you know, heal your way through the situation. So in your book and in general, you speak a lot to the trauma you've experienced, right? Speaking of trauma and difficulty that we're all going through now. And I wonder if you can speak to that as you tell us a bit about what it means to be a shaman and how you knew this was something you wanted to pursue, because I think they're all linked, right?
I think so. I mean, you know, my own story, and on the shamanic piece, I mean, I trained with, I believe, you know, there's a lot of people out there who, there's the rise of shamanism happening. And I always say, you know, please don't learn the old ways on YouTube. You know, the ancient ceremonies, etc. So, you know, I think it's really important to have a human teacher. So my human teacher is a gentleman by the name of Daniel Leonard. I also trained with Sandra Ingerman, but we are trained not to call ourselves that, right? So that's the first step. Is my clients can call me that, and community can call me that. But the path of sort of walking as a practitioner of shamanism, I went through an initiation. So many people who are magnetized to that path have typically gone through initiation. So whether it's near death, or having, you know, death around you, trauma. So my own, I mean, I found shamanism essentially because I had looked everywhere else. I had, you know, I'd grown up with some trauma. I lost my best friend 2 days before my 19th birthday. I went to her funeral on my birthday. It was one of those things where when I found out that she had left the planet, I felt it. And I felt it energetically first. So I was the one who made the phone call to find out what, because there was a disturbance in the force. I mean, I think that's the best way to describe it. There was something that had shifted. And after it shifted, her voice, for lack of a better way of describing it, it moved from her body into my consciousness. So I all of a sudden was feeling her, hearing her. And that became my number one trauma. I always talk about this sort of 7-layer burrito of trauma. And the thing with trauma is once you've had it, it just will, if you don't handle it, it just keeps layering, right? And then the initial trauma sort of gets pushed down to the bottom. And that was what happened with me. I mean, I was already, by the time my best friend passed away, I had already been in a car accident and totaled my car and rolled it end to end and, you know, shouldn't have walked away. There were already, you know, I was already having challenges grappling with addiction, and I never really thought about why. I mean, I knew that there was something that had gone on in my childhood, but I wasn't exactly sure what it was. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s where I had, you know, I had gone to therapy, I had done all these things, and it occurred to me that maybe I should try something else. So it was total synchronicity. Similar synchronicity to the beautiful sacred hearts we both have above our heads magically.
Yeah, we noticed that above.
Yeah, amazing. So there was a lot of synchronicity, and I ended up finding my teacher. I went to go see Daniel Leonard, which I understood what he did as a restoration of power. That was what I understood it to be. And at the time I thought, and I mean, I grew up, with spirit in my life, but when I lost my best friend, I mean, my reaction, I think a lot of people when they have trauma, my reaction was, I'm just going to become successful. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to deal with this at all. I'm going to watch this, everyone. Watch what I can do. So a lot of my production career was about me trying to forget what had happened and sort of reinventing myself and kind of creating, which I think a lot of trauma survivors do. We kind of create a character for masking, right? It's like, okay, this is who I am now. So I had gone through, becoming successful, and I didn't feel any better. I wasn't feeling any better. So eventually I ended up going for this soul retrieval ceremony, which is, again, I understood it to be a restoration of power. And I thought, worst case scenario, this man who's been doing this for a long time is going to use his energy and I'm going to maybe feel better. That was sort of the way that I looked at it. And I wasn't sure what that was going to look like. And of course, it was based in percussion. Most shamanism is based, a lot of people know about the ayahuasca sort of side of shamanism, but that's Peruvian. Other cultures, the majority of cultures and Peruvian culture, use vibration. So drum, rattle. So essentially this man, drummed for a couple of hours. I laid on the floor, and when I opened my eyes, everything felt different. And I remember looking at him and just thinking, like, what is this? And because I'm a nerd, I grew up, a producer and worked in technology. I wanted to know how it worked. So I did the research and looked into it, but my trauma ended up, finally naming it, was that I had been sexually abused by my father. So thinking back to, my 7-layer burrito, things were traumatic for me as soon as I got here on the planet. And really early on. And so meeting my best friend who had ended up passing away, I met her when I was a toddler, and recognizing, the bottom that had fallen out of my supportive universe when she left the planet, really kind of left me lost for, a good 15, 20 years after she left. And eventually, obviously, had me seek out my own healing to look at, why had the bottom fallen out? Why hadn't I been able to get past this? And began to sort of walk my own path, doing the work on myself. And a lot of people, begin the shamanic path as wounded healers. So a lot of my work was really about that restoration of power. And with shamanism, the idea is that we can lose energy through trauma, but that energy is waiting for us. Because, the science of energy is it can neither be created nor destroyed. So it's out there. So once I understood that, I became an active participant on my healing journey where I wanted that power back. And I wanted to know what my life would look like if I was operating with all my power. And I felt that even though, my self-worth was not great. I mean, I treated myself like a garbage can because that's what I was taught to do. And once I sort of started to come out from under that, realizing that I did deserve the opportunity to know what it was like to live with all of my parts, so to speak. So I started walking that journey and then was called to practice, which I didn't think. I mean, when I started out working on my own healing journey, I did not think that this is something that I would be doing for a living or, talking about, because it was something that, historically, A, we don't talk about witchcraft, and B, we do not talk about childhood sexual abuse. So those two things, it was very much like coming out of the closet for me. And I am queer, so it was the same kind of feeling of sort of stepping into that place where, I realized that this was part of my own origin story, my own sort of superhero origin story. And it was part of finding the others, of being able to speak that those things out loud, to be able to find other people who were working through them.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, because I know that, and you know that when you talk about it, when you name it, when it comes forward, that's when other people can start to see it in themselves if they don't already, or it gives people permission to be able to be who they are and be able to talk about it as well. Some of what I want to touch on today, as well as how to bring magic into your life, especially in these times.
Yes.
I want to talk about your book and what you mean when you say it's a spell and a portal. And I've got your book here. I'm going to hold it up in a sec. I've had 2 sessions with you, right? We've had lots of mini conversations and what have you, but I've had 2 sessions with you, and every time I am floored by how much, synchronicity, breadcrumbs come up, right? It's pretty wild. I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, I think once you get to a certain point, you're just like, yeah, okay. Like, so for example, I have redesigned my office since the last time we talked. You're in a completely different place than where we usually are.
Yes.
And we both show up and we both have sacred hearts, not only on the walls, but like literally right by our heads. And that is not unusual for when I get on calls with you. I'm getting all, my legs have just started to go numb as I'm talking about this. And that's just...
You might fly off your chair. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah. be forewarned. So I'd love to know, knowing this, right? How do you prepare for your sessions? I know you're a medium, and I'm curious about how you access your guides and what kind of work do you do to keep your own energy clean? So, again, those parts all sort of work together, right?
Yeah. So, so synchronicity is the language of nature, right? So when synchronicity comes through, it means we're on track, right? So, and I talk about in the book, the people that are closest to me, sometimes they're like, that's too much, see you later, right? Because it's a lot. It's a lot. So like we may speak about something and then it happens. I had that situation on the weekend. And the more magical people, and when I use the word magical, I mean open to, the laws of nature and, the idea that everything is made of energy and everything is vibrating. So if we start there and we think about that, we can think that the system that we operate within, so we talked about, that the current sort of systems that we're working with are against the laws of nature. Because they're designed to separate us. Right. So in the book, I talk about the uninvited, which they are.
Hold up the book.
Yeah, thanks. They are, who are previously known as the capitalist, white supremacist, colonial patriarchy. And they designed a lot of these systems, right? I mean, no one invited them. I call them that because no one said, hey, let's get these guys in here. Let's see what let's get these guys to ruin everything. And thinking about it, even when I was working on the book, a lot of the first draft was me naming a lot of white men and attributing certain things to white men. And of course, acknowledging in the book that we may know these things as, said by white men, but that's probably not who said them first. They were just who were the loudest. And we're experiencing that now, right? So when I talk about the book being a portal or a spell, I mean, the book is a spell for collective liberation. And the best part about collective liberation is it starts with one of us. So again, if we think about being a vibration or an energetic field, as we step into our own power and acknowledge that fact, that's an act of revolution. Because the uninvited have told us the only way to connect, especially in Catholicism, the only way to connect with spirit is to go to this building, to talk to one of these men, and then they'll put you in touch with. And I remember growing up Catholic and thinking, that doesn't make sense. Like, I want to talk to Jesus directly. Why do I have to talk to him through a priest? That makes no sense to me. But that's the way that this has been designed throughout. I mean, I think, I talk a lot about Jesus of Nazareth, and, that guy flipped tables and carried a wand and
Yeah.
a whip. Like he was a disruptor. And of course, throughout history, he's been made much less disruptive, right? Where he's taken on this very sort of white, savior idea, and his workings are
literally
being taken, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this idea of the book being a spell, essentially it's instructions at how to reconnect and reclaim our magic. And there's rituals. Each chapter is set in a different room in a temple. And then there's rituals in each chapter that the reader or initiate can do to reconnect themselves. And then the book is a portal, and it's called an interdimensional adventure because, as we talked about at the beginning here, this idea of ordinary reality and non-ordinary reality. So we talked about this idea that synchronicity is the language of nature. Intention is essentially like a cursor to energy to show where we're trying to go. So because the book starts in a temple of wonder and we're going through these different rooms in the temple, those places exist not only in this book, but in non-ordinary reality. So when I was working on the book, I was seeing it. I was dreaming about it. And I worked with my teacher to figure out what was going on, because I thought, what is this? What are these places? And I worked with my guides as well, but pulling down these actual rooms. So what's been the most fun about people reading the book is getting messages from people who are like, I was reading this and I was in the greenhouse and then I walked into the garden and then in my office, I felt like there were butterflies around me. And of course, yeah. That's why, I always say, especially with shamanic work, like, don't try to do it while you're driving, because you will end up, you're in as above and so below, essentially at the same time. So that's sort of how the book is a portal. And it was beautiful because my dear friend Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman, looked at it. He was going to blurb it before he passed away. And he had felt that it was a portal. And after he passed away, he came through a few medium friends of mine, because of course I have like a psychic friends network. He came through a few friends of mine and said to tell me that it was a portal. And I was like, I know, you already told me that. But that, rooting in that idea that this book can take you. And I mean, all books take you places, right? But this one is designed to create a spiritual adventure.
And direct experience with that on my end is I had an out-of-body experience, and I wrote to you. So, when I was in high school, I was messing around with all kinds of different things. And one of the things was, I've told you this story, but I was listening to Depeche Mode. I was listening to Waiting for the Night to Come. And I had like what felt like a transcendental experience. I was traveling through space, and physically it felt like I wasn't in my room. I could see, the universe. And I've always remembered that story. I wrote to Martin Gore to tell him about that story. I'll probably bring that up at another episode. But so I was reading your book, and then I had a very similar experience, and I haven't had that since, for 32 years. And I wrote to you and I said, hey, so has anybody ever talked about anything like this? And you're like, yeah, the book's a portal. And I'm like, right. Okay. And so, I think it's also wild/not wild that you're getting all these other messages from here and beyond about, yeah, it's a fucking portal. You're like, yes, it's on the book. Are you reading this or what? Like, are you paying attention? I said it's a portal. It's actually a portal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a portal of healing. It's a portal of self-discovery. And it's funny because a lot of people that I know tell me that it's beside their bed. And I'm like, welcome to having more fun in dream time. I mean, it's an invitation to more connection. And I think, going back to the idea of, witchcraft, that's sometimes scary for people, right? I mean, I think that and it's
Yeah.
been designed to be.
Yes.
But I think, the one thing that I can say about this book is, and there's a light on the cover, right? I mean, this is serious, and it's in the shape of a heart that comes from a friend of mine, Peter Roth, who took that picture. And, that's at the end of the adventure is a light heart, right? It's a heart of light. So the book is rooted in light, right? We do talk about shadow because it's a part of the reality that we live in. But I always remind, all of my clients and friends that, to remove shadow, we just add more light. So it's, and even with this low, sort of dense feeling that we're all having right now, it feels foggy, it feels cloudy. But again, in nature, how do we deal with fog? What happens when the fog goes away? So we have all these, examples in the natural world of how cycles and systems work. And I think, most of us have been asleep to them. I mean, I certainly was for many years with my trauma. And, it's what I love about shamanic work is the wake up is quick. And I needed a quick wake up, right? I needed, after all the years that I'd spent walking through hell, literally, and, spending time there, for me, I needed something quick to be able to snap me out of it. And that's why the book's called What We've Forgotten, because it's a remembering. Like you just said with the Depeche Mode song, you remembered that, right? It was like you hadn't felt like that in a while, and then it was a remembering. So even when I work with clients in person, sometimes they'll say to me, what is this? Like, what is this feeling? And I'm like, it's remembering. And that, when we get to the planet, and we talked a little bit about fire as an element, but water's the first element we meet in the womb. So oftentimes, I'll instruct or suggest with clients where I'm like, have a bath or a shower and just ask the water to remember you and notice the difference.
Oh, I love that.
Because it knows, right? It knows our original vibration. So being able to, and I mean, Masaru Emoto did a lot of tests with water and programmed water, and there's a lot of cool stuff on YouTube about working with water. And water's conductive; it carries a charge. So even with the ceremonies that I do, water is a part of it, right? If I'm working with people and we're doing a clearing or an extraction ceremony, water plays a huge role in it. And as a practitioner, especially with shamanism, it's seen as I'm a hollow bone, right? I just get out of the way and spirit does the work. But that's a very sort of, again, a natural world way of thinking. And with the mediumship work, just to touch on that, because there was the idea of portal and, how does that happen? How does mediumship work? If we think about it like a vibration, and then we think about people call themselves channels, right? It becomes a lot clearer to think of it like a radio. And that we are brain waves, right? Brain waves can be measured, and we have different states, which are in the book. This idea of theta, beta, all these different states of consciousness. That as we as human beings can actually move through those states, and that's how I do mediumship, right? I just have to make sure I'm on the right channel, and I think and once I get there. A lot of my different helpers are on different channels. So my best friend who I talked about, Erin, she passed away in 1997, and I know her channel, right? I've been on her channel. I've known her channel since I was 2 years old. And the channel didn't change just because she left the planet. Her channel is maintained. And it's not just maintained for me. It's maintained for her mom, for her, her sister-in-law. She's loud. So there's a lot of spirits that are loud. Mine all tend to be loud. I'm loud. So that's sort of how it works in terms of mediumship. And my teachers have always taught me that if one of us can do it, any of us can do it. It just takes practice. So what we've forgotten is sort of an introductory journey into that sort of stuff and awakening, that gift within us.
Yeah. And that's leading me to my next question, which is, so once we start to connect, once we're following breadcrumbs, right? And we can think of this as asking for a sign and seeing it, or having certain things that sort of let you know that you're not walking alone, or synchronicities, breadcrumbs, making connections. How can we use this work to speak up, to be advocates? And this goes back to you talking about, elevating the collective and working towards, collective liberation. How can we directly use this work towards that? Because you can see where, and we do see it a lot with a lot of good vibes only, and I don't even, I sometimes I think that folks that are good vibes only are just, they just haven't quite, still a direction to go, right? There's more learning to do, and just to give people the benefit of the doubt. But once you start to tap into this, once you start to see things, once you get curious about this, how can you start to use this work towards that community element, that collective liberation?
It's a great question. I think the first thing that it does when you start to sort of, like we talked about intention being a cursor, when you start to aim your intention toward connection and remembering, the first thing that usually happens is you're going to find the others. So there's going to be people that are going to start to come to the front in your life, in your consciousness. It can be every day. Sometimes I'll call those people hired actors, where sometimes you're out and someone will say something or show you something or give, where you're like, that's strange, that just happened. So, and if we think about that everything is energy and everything is vibrating, and that there's something in quantum physics called quantum entanglement, which is the idea that we are connected by some kind of, and this is physics, this is not magic, but it is magic, that we are connected by some kind of connective tissue that we cannot see. So Albert Einstein talked about it as being spooky action at a distance, where they sent two particles into space and one of them started to move. They spun one, and the other one, although they were not connected anymore, started to spin at the same time. So he found that spooky, and it is spooky. But there is this connective tissue. In shamanism, we call it the web of life or the web of light. Either or works, but this idea that we're all connected through something that we can't see. And that's, we talked about this idea of it being sort of reflected in nature. That's dark matter, right? We don't know. And when we see stars at night in the dark, we don't know what that matter is. Nobody really knows what that is, right? Still in science. So there's something, right? There's something out there. So if we think about that is conductive, whatever that is and is made of, if that's conductive, and if we think about it like a web, if I'm sending out a certain vibration, I'm probably going to raise that vibration within other people. So that is where synchronicity comes in, where sometimes, I've had, I could talk for hours about this kinds of synchronicity that happen. And sometimes synchronicity is why I call them breadcrumbs. Because if you follow them, they'll tend to lead you where you're supposed to go. And sometimes the door will close, right? Sometimes I'll be following a breadcrumb and I'll think that it's the right breadcrumb, and then it's nope. And then I have to change direction because I've been too literal or whatever those things are. So I talk about life being an intention-driven scavenger hunt, and it is. But you got to get the first clue right in order to sort of move beyond that. So the first clue is usually finding the others. That's usually once you sort of change your vibration and intentionally work towards that, you're going to be presented with more opportunities to connect with people who are trying to do the same thing. So this is what we're seeing now, right? We're seeing a rising of activism, right? Witchcraft is inherently activism, right? Especially when we're living in the uninvited, dominated world with all these rules. So when we move toward that idea of connection, community, change, we tend to find we find the others, we find those sort of connective tissues. And then the next step of it is sort of putting our connective tissue together with other people. So for example, if you're getting involved with activism as a way to, place your energy, because the reaction without being connected to spirit is when there's anger, we get angry. When there's sadness, we get sad. The magical way of looking at that is, what's the transmutation of that? Because in my mind, there's enough rage in the collective. I don't need to add any more. It's not going to be helpful. It's not getting us where we need to go. So my reaction to the rage is going to be fierce compassion. And in bringing fierce compassion into the rage, and that's not toxic positivity. That's me becoming an alchemist and changing a vibration from one to the other. So I talk about how to do that in the book. But this idea of essentially, it's Jedi work, right? You're taking shadow and turning it into light. And there's times where I don't do that, where I just want to eat chips and watch TV, right? I mean, that's the part of being human on the planet.
Like me every single day.
Yeah, and that's fine, right? A lot of us are doing that. And that's where the power of our intention is still active, right? We can still hold the intention while we're eating chips of lightening things up or
do everything while you're eating chips.
Exactly. There's so many different kinds. And this idea of being able to sort of connect with other like-minded people, and that eventually creates liberation. I mean, we're seeing that especially with the conflict in the Middle East, where there's this uprising. We saw it through schools, universities, etc. A lot of these students that maybe on the surface didn't really have anything in common, and suddenly they're creating, an occupation, a campground inside their universities, and essentially turning a light onto all of these things that have remained in shadow, which of course nobody likes that. We got to get them out of there. But that's the side effect of collective liberation, is that connective tissue and the real community work, which is required right now, which is making sure that nobody's drowning, right? And there's a lot of people on the planet that are drowning. So our job, and I think that's the thing, with toxic positivity, you can't save people while they're drowning, right? You can't start talking, hey, why don't you change the way you're thinking? That's not, we just got to get them in the boat.
Think about it differently.
Exactly. We got to get them in the boat. And I think that's part of what's missing right now. There's this division, right? Which, again, if we see it magically, it's light and shadow. It's density. And I don't mean density as being, that anyone is less, the cats are sneezing, that anyone is less than, anyone else. It just means that if we think of humanity like a dirty window, sometimes the light doesn't get through. So we just have to clean it. So that's where, I joke, it's like a Care Bear stare, right? Where we're blasting it with light versus blasting it with anger and frustration, because that's not working. And it hasn't worked for hundreds of years. So this is why we're seeing this rise in people being interested in spirituality and magic and the divine feminine. There's much more discussion about those things. The side effect that we're seeing on the planet from all these people stepping into the light is a lot of reveals, right? And apocalypse means revealing, unveiling, right? It doesn't mean ending. It means revealing. So all these things that we're seeing now with a lot of these predators, a lot of these dangerous humans being exposed, and people are going, whoa, I didn't realize how bad this was. And it's like, well, welcome to humanity. And shining a light on these things. Obviously it's scary to be able to, to see these things, but now we know. So this is how change occurs. Exactly. Right. This is how change occurs.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I'm a big practitioner of shadow work, and I do a lot of shadow work with my clients who are just working to elevate their visibility and speak up, learn how to speak up. And, it's people are afraid of the word shadow, right? They think that shadow work, they think that tarot, they think, I have some stuff coming up about this, but it's the greatest marketing plan in the world on behalf of the jerks, is to market everything that can create liberation for yourself and, community and working together is, it's been marketed as, witchcraft and evil and the devil and, even the devil has been marketed as the devil, which, sounds ridiculous, but like it's not like you think of not me and not you and not a lot of people, but when you think of a witch, you've got a certain paradigm in your mind of what that means. And then once you start to really look into it and you go, wait a minute, I've been lied to about everything. Okay. So we're going to make sure that people know how to get your incredible book. And I highly recommend it in the show notes, as well as
Thank you.
Learning how to have a session with you, because, I'm a huge fan of you and the work that you do. And I know that it's been life-changing for me in many ways. And I'm wondering, before I do all my, reading about show notes and following and all of that, is there a message that you have about, you and I have talked before about how we've been feeling this sense of miracles coming, right? And we can call them miracles, or you can call them whatever you want, because there's just, if we believe that we're all connected by this web, then there's got to be all this other stuff that's happening behind the scenes that we don't know about. Yeah. I'm wondering, because I believe that hopefulness is the way forward. Once we lose hope that anything can change, we're sort of screwed. Mm-hmm. Is there one message of hopefulness you'd like folks to leave with today? Like, is there something that you feel called to say?
Yeah. I think it's, I mean, going back, like we talked a little bit about Jesus of Nazareth, and there's something that I talk about in the book with him, because I believe this is, it's, some people don't like it when I say this, but that means that it's triggering something good, I think. But he's a witch, right? Jesus of Nazareth was a witch. We talk about, he was doing alchemy, right? He was healing people. He was using hands-on healing. And transfiguration work it's in the book. It's probably the main sort of message in the book of lighting things up. And he talked about, they say that he said that he was the Son of God. And I think when we talked about the uninvited and that they kind of got their hands in there and changed things a little bit, I think he said that he was the Son of Source, meaning the light of Source. And he meant that we are too. So, and in ancient Egyptian teachings, this idea of children of the light, right? And the idea that maybe pyramids were just arrows pointing to the sky. And maybe the clue all along was just what's out there, what's up there, right? What makes us who we are. So embodying this on a daily basis, which is difficult in a world that is full of dense messages. Mm-hmm. But it's an act of revolution and liberation to stand in hope and change. And what I can say as someone who, I spend probably 90% of my time as a human being in spirit world, and meaning I walk between worlds. And what I can say about Source and about the energy it brings, it's love, right? It's love. Yeah. The currency is love. So this time that we're moving through right now that feels like everything is in upheaval, it needs to be in upheaval because it's not in alignment with who we are. And we're seeing this separation of humanity between dense people and people who are trying to operate in light. And again, the only difference between these people is some people have a dirty window, right? They still have the exact same tools that we have available to us. We're still rooted in light, but it's where we're focused, right? And they're focused on the shadow. So our job as those who are trying to be change agents in the world right now, and that's why we're here on the planet right now in 2024, is to do that Care Bear stare and to channel that light and shine it on them and also call their light to the front, right? They may not be doing it, but we can. Yes. And a lot of people with magic tell me, oh, you can't do magic on other people. This isn't doing magic on other people, right? We are not using our will to try to change them. All we're doing is calling what's already in them to the front. So you can start doing that on a daily basis, whether you're going to the doctor or the bank or dealing with people at a grocery store. Before you go in, you can just set your intention and ask that the best people come to the front. And just notice the change, right? And that will help to continue to sort of build, because a lot of people have a hard time building a relationship with something they can't see. So that's why synchronicity helps us to trust, right? It helps us to, and it's true, right? Megan and I have not been in this space before. I'm in a completely different area of my house with this, Sacred Heart above me. And trusting that Spirit will give you the clues when you're on the right track. And that as you start to follow those things, hope opens up, right? Finding the others, being able to change these things. And I always tell people when they're really feeling bleak, get into activism, right? Find the others, get involved. Yes,
changing,
right?
action.
Yeah.
We can't just sit and welcome the light constantly. You actually do have to get out and make change for all of this to start to make sense, because once you sort of are opened up, you realize that then it's your job to be that person that other people will see and make changes from. There's a responsibility with that, right? Yeah. All right. That I'm such a big fan of you, and I'm
Thank you
so
much.
grateful for you to come on and share all of this with
It was
us.
a gift. Thank you for having me.
Truly my pleasure. And for all of you who are starting to connect, if you're starting to think, okay, please know that you can find all the information and takeaways from today's episode in the show notes or at embracingenchantment.com. Please subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd love for you to leave a review or leave a voice note. I love voice notes. You can find out more about Amy and where to follow her also in the show notes or at embracingenchantment.com, and I'll put as much stuff in there as I can so you can find out all the good stuff. And you're going to want to make sure you're subscribed, because we have some exciting episodes coming up about tarot, human design, the question of whether magic is real, and so much more. So until then, thank you so much, Amy. And here's to building an enchanted life. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, I'm going to stop this. Stop.